All right, morning everyone. It's 8:30 and I will bring to order the council meeting of September 26th. We have an agenda before us. What are our additions going to be? Councillor Cunningham.
I just have a verbal for police advisory, please.
It's a 9.2 already on. Okay. Councillor McGee.
I'll give you a quick report on Marigold Library and then also another one on Cape.
Okay, 6.3 Marigold, 9.4.
And I'll represent all of us who were at our summit yesterday, and I can get the ball rolling for that as well.
9.5, what was that, ITT? IT?
Yep, that sounds right.
Okay. Mr. Hogan.
Mr. Chair, would like to request that we add a letter of support for the province regarding the renewable energies pause.
Okay, so that'll be under legislative services, 7.5?
Yes.
Letter to province. Are there any other additions to the agenda? Councillor Christie.
Just a question, do we need to add the agenda to send a thank you note to transportation and to our MLA for the bridge on, what is it, 571?
We have that down as a to-do item.
Okay.
What was the comment there? Okay. Mr. Hogan?
And we should formally add it went out with as a late addition to the package, but we should add the Acme Alumni Association gymnasium funding request. There is a delegation as well as an addition under disposition of delegations and public hearing business.
Okay, so that'll be 8.1. Acme Alumni?
3.1.
Yeah, and 3.1. And that is at 10 o'clock? That's correct. 10 a.m. Are there any other additions to the agenda? Councillor Christie.
If not, I'll move the agenda as amended.
Okay, we have a motion to move the agenda as amended. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We pre-circulated the regular meeting minutes of the September 12th council meeting. Are there any errors, omissions, concerns? Deputy Reeve King.
If there are no corrections, I would move the minutes from the September 12th regular council meeting minutes as presented.
Alrighty, we have a motion to accept the minutes as presented. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. So our first agenda item will be 4.1 Policy 13.2. And welcome, Mr. Zier.
Good morning, Council.
And anytime you're ready.
Thank you for that. So on page 9 of your agenda package, you'll see the item 4.1, which is the Greater Gravel Services Policy Update. So what administration is looking for here is that recommended motion that council approve the changes to policy 13.2 of the Greater Gravel Services Policy, and further to direct administration to deliver an appropriate communications approach to relay these changes to ratepayers and to stakeholders. So just a little bit of background. As council is aware, council policies are a council-driven directive, basically setting the parameters of different transportation, corporate services that the county provides. Council policies are up for review every 4 years, typically. As I mentioned previously, this one is actually a little bit shorter than that because we had a few changes that we want to propose to council. So this policy and the changes was presented at the June 27th Committee of the Whole meeting. The changes were discussed through the Committee of the Whole there, and just some of the highlights of those changes were the removal of the ability for ratepayers for the county to provide private citizens with snow plowing and grading operations. As I mentioned at the Committee of the Whole meeting, this is kind of a trend that you see with a lot of municipalities in the province and across the western provinces here, as far as removing the liability from these communities going on private lands. A lot of times we don't understand what's in the yards there. If it's snow clearing, there's a risk of damage to occur as well. A lot of our equipment is getting larger and larger per year, and we're finding it more difficult to enter these sites and do it safely. So the recommendation is that we eliminate that service from the policy here and from one of the services that we provide. Secondly, it's just some references to the summer and winter maintenance for both paved and chip seal roads. In the previous policy, there wasn't actually any identification on those. So we added just some verbiage around that to clarify it. So just going back here, you'll see on the agenda package a red line version of the policy, which shows the existing policy and then all the changes that are proposed here, as well as a version of a black line version, which basically what the end policy would look like if council approved all the changes today. And then, so as we get into here, I'll go back to this. So the other changes that were proposed are the removal of the minimum grader rotations. That's something that we looked at in comparison with adjacent municipalities in the province and thought perhaps it's a better way of approaching this, as far as not necessarily looking at a minimum rotation of every road in the county getting what it is right now 6, but more tying it to a needs basis, as far as where we see the highest intensity. We have quite a bit of data as far as past history on these roads. We know where the troublesome roads are. We know where we are actually hitting them multiple times, way more than 6 times per year on some of these roads. As well, we see a lot of the roads that we actually see a detrimental effect to doing 6 times the grading per year. So we wanted to look at modifying that a little bit, just to assess where we're really focusing our attention on that. I'll kind of point some attention here to page 22 of your agenda package there. So that's showing a map. That's really kind of a new initiative that we're taking on here with some of our operations staff, as far as this is a direct screenshot from one of our work order systems. So this is a program that we utilize with our grader supervisors right now. We're kind of in a testing phase with this right now, but it is going to ultimately be proven out with grader operator access. So this kind of shows a GPS tracking through our work order system what roads we've identified, as well as, if you can see the little notepads there, those are problem areas that we find on the roads as they're going through. So what happens is, you'll see on one of them, there's a pothole that was identified on Buffalo Jump Road there on this route patrol. That was identified, immediate work order was created for that, and the repair is going to be scheduled after that. So it's kind of showing how we're identifying these problem areas prior to ratepayers or even staff finding them, other staff. The grader operators are going to be ultimately the ones that are first finding these problems and able to identify them. So just kind of an idea and just kind of a reference for council to understand where we're going with technology here and what the abilities, what the potentials we have for moving forward on this. So just going to the black line version here, I'll just point out there's a couple changes from the proposed policy that I presented to Committee of the Whole in June. There was some identification of perhaps some need for a reference of some sort to how we're going to, how often we're actually going to be out there. As you see in one of our comparison charts here, we did a little comparison of adjacent municipalities and found that the majority of them don't have a limit for how many times they're going out, or a maximum or minimum for how many times they're going out grading. That said, we still felt it was important to put in here, just for hopefully council's comfort and then the ratepayers' comfort, that we are going to endeavor to grade the majority of our roads once every 3 weeks. That gives kind of a benchmark for everyone to understand what our real direction is. That is quite tight. That is basically perfect conditions. That is what our rotations take on our typical roads. So we put it in here as a benchmark to try and achieve that, knowing that it can sway depending on weather conditions or intensity of truck hauls, that sort of thing, that draw our attention somewhere else. The other change that you'll see on page 19 is a reintroduction of this snow clearing trigger measurements. So that's one that, actually looking at a comparison of adjacent municipalities, this is a pretty standard inclusion in their policies as far as what triggers the release of our equipment or deployment of our equipment out during both snow events as well as cleanup after those snow events. So I thought as well, for council's comfort, if we include this back in here, it does give us a bit of a benchmark as well to come back and justify our actions out there. I'll remind, I have included a section previous in this winter maintenance where it is ultimately the supervisor's call if the road conditions are deemed, even if it doesn't necessarily meet these 2 centimeters or 10 centimeters, 5 centimeters or 10 centimeters, drifting may still warrant that we go out there, even if it isn't a total cumulative of that. So again, it's something that council wanted to look at revising some of these things. These are what my recommendations are based on best practices and also adjacent comparisons. So those are the changes from the proposal that was first shown to committee of the whole in June. And I am here to answer any further questions the council has.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Zier? Councillor Forbes.
I will start off with, I did get a few phone calls after this package went out for our ratepayers to see. One of the questions was was there a legal opinion sought on the liability aspect of going into people's private properties? Because before, were you having them sign a waiver saying the county wouldn't be responsible for any of that? If they should happen to come in and hurt some or wreck something on the property because it wasn't cleared of the snow for the grader driver to see.
Right. And through the chair, yes, we did have them sign a hold harmless agreement as part of the process for applying for that. It does, you're right. I mean, there is some absolvance of liability with that. It's not a steadfast, kind of what as with everything in legal is, right? We're just looking at, for one, the liability is a big part of it. Two, the timing. I know we talked about it even in the committee of the whole here, where it would be great if we just had the routes going prior to our snow clearing. But looking at the past procedures on how we did that, it was almost always typically a call a day after the snowplow went by, that we actually got a call for clearing the driveway. So we would have to redeploy our graders out to clear those driveways. So looking at efficiencies, that wasn't necessarily there for just going off the road and clearing the driveway and continuing on with the path. The grader and snowplow's main purpose is to clear the through routes, and that is their main directive when a snow event happens and the cleanup of that. So these after clearings are typically done on a one-off basis, and like I say, it's done. It's not very efficient how it's done, but looking at the other alternatives, this is the way that we had.
Councillor Forbes.
So I guess one of the other questions I got is we update these policies and the current year is about to happen for snow removal, and people that are out there don't have the ability to find something like that in the snap of a finger. Because I do realize that in our county, I know the MGA says that we can't compete against private industry as a county. So do we have people that could do that for them on a list, because you're gonna get a phone call that says, well, you did it last year, so what are you doing for me this year? If you're not doing it, how do I find someone that can? And I just wanna make sure we have those in place, because we do these policies and then, sorry about your luck, people, this is what you get. And there's no real notice given to them for that until they phone in and they find out they can't have it done by us.
I think if we were to do a list, we would be in kind of contravention of something, because we're not gonna include everyone that's in the area, so we're gonna end up running into a problem where, well, why wasn't I on the list? I think most of that stuff is advertised. I don't know. Social media would probably be the best place to find that information. Not that I'm advocating social media by any means, but
Contact list?
I think if the county gets involved in it, we could be, I don't know, yeah, go ahead.
Are you gonna go? Yeah, so through the chair, so that's definitely something that we've been considerate of. We understand that, yes, we can't leave people just hanging when we've potentially done this for a number of years for individuals. Our approach there with this communications strategy that we were looking at was definitely to inform these ratepayers of the, as soon as we can, of the change in the policy here. What we can do, which is not against any kind of legislation. We can invite contractors to present their business to us. We can develop that list, not necessarily recommending any one of them, but allowing the residents to have this list of potential contractors who have actually given us their name and their capabilities. And we can release that as long as we don't rely on one to being, this is our choice, right? So it does give them that information to make a decision on their own as far as which company, but it gives them the resources. So that was part of the strategy with what we were going to look at if this change was approved.
So we would put out a request, or not a request, but we would put something out to say, if you're a contractor and you have the ability to do this, submit your name and we'll be on a list of our people who can do this stuff? Or?
Correct, yes, through the chair.
But not any recommendations?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
These, yeah, just basically a list of identified companies that have proposed to us that they can do it. No guarantees on our end that their services are
Okay.
applicable, right?
All right, you want to go down that path, go ahead. I sure don't. Anyway, Councillor Cunningham.
So I've had quite a few conversations in regards to this issue, both on the ratepayer side and the private contractor. I actually just had one on the way home from Calgary yesterday with a private contractor. They're really finding that they're busy to the point where they almost don't want to do this type of work, this fellow's opinion anyways. So I'm really concerned about removing this service. I know it's the trend, but in some ways I think we want to buck the trend. I think we want to have service that is above maybe what other municipalities offer. And I do really worry about your senior couple that has lived, you know, on their farm for 40 years. Maybe they should move to town, but they're not ready. And to take this away from them, I think we're taking away from what we are here to do, and that is to provide the service to our ratepayers. So I just can't get behind this one. And out of that 5,000, I'm curious, like, how many are we talking about? Because I know it can't be a whole bunch.
Through the chair, I can get you a list if you like. It's approximately 30 to 40 a year is what we look at for 30 to 40 requests a year.
Councillor Christie.
So that'd be 30 or 40 ratepayers or 30 or 40 requests from how many people? Like
that through the chair, I'd have to clarify. Yeah. I didn't.
Councillor Foulkes.
And does any of that include industries in our county? Like, if an industry phones you and says, hey, my thing broke down, I can't do it, could you come over and plow the road to get to my business?
Yeah, again, through the chair, I'd have to clarify, but I don't believe we get very many. I can't say that I've seen one from industry in the time I've been here, so, yeah. I don't see all of them, but I would hear about it, so.
Councillor Penner.
I haven't got a call as yet, but I know I will when the first major dumping comes. And we're not getting the hamlets cleaned. With that, we've got up to 5 days, 120 hours. That, to me, seems a long time, from 24 to 120 hours. So I'm thinking I'm gonna get some calls, because that's too big of a difference. I know they get there as quick as they can, but I'm gonna go back and say, well, it says that they got up to 5 days to get it cleared, you know, so especially in the hamlets. And on the local roads, the gravel roads and whatnot else, if I can't get out, I'm using my tractor. I've got that availability. But for the hamlets, I just have an issue with that.
Councillor Forbes?
And while we're on that subject, I also had another conversation too around the back alleys in our hamlets. Sometimes if a fire were to take place and it would be accessible for the fire truck to get, would be closer through the back alleys, but our back alleys are not maintained. I'm not saying they have to be maintained every single snowfall, but if they're in town, I do notice that some of our snow removal in the town is done by a truck with a blade on the front. So if he happens to drive by and sees at the back alley, you can't even get down it, could he just do a quick swipe down? So that if a fire should take place and they have to access the back alley, they have the ability to do so, so that the house doesn't burn to the ground and they lose everything. There's a question that I did have from some ratepayers.
Yeah, so through the chair, definitely back alleys is something that's been identified as a concerned area. You're right, we don't typically clear any back alleys of snow. We are looking at modifying that a little bit here and maybe doing some trials as far as what that looks like for extra service levels and that sort of thing. Because definitely, I mean, once we add those, it does increase our time in the hamlets by quite a bit, significantly so. We're going to try a few trial areas this year and see how it goes for timing.
Councillor Forbes?
The roads are a hot topic. I know when we held one of our ratepayer evenings, we had a discussion around the dirt roads, the access for farmers being able to access their fields.
Yes.
In the spring and the fall. Is the rotation of doing those going to change as well?
So through the chair, we actually have a separate dirt road policy, which I haven't identified as changes. If council wants to look at that, I can definitely bring that back. I'm not sure when the review on that one was. I do identify it in this policy here, but it's its own policy on it separately. It is 2 rotations per year is what our standard is, yeah.
Is that going to change, I guess, is the real question, because I have had that question from a few farmers.
Okay, yeah. Through the chair, like I say, if council wants me to bring that forward for discussion, I can definitely do that.
It won't change on this policy.
No.
Mr. Hogan, you got a comment?
Just as a note to a comment made earlier around the hamlets and the 5 days, the 24 to 120 hours actually is the current standard. That's not a change from how we've operating right now. And the last time the policy reviewed is I don't think that standard was changed at that time either. So 5 days has been the standard for hamlets for quite some time.
But we're generally there prior to that.
We're usually there quicker than that, yes.
Councillor McGee?
So in that, is that you're assessing, if we were to get that, you know, once in 100-year snowfall of 4 feet, you can't get through it at our shorter time frame. So is that why you have that there, is because of that unique situation where it takes more time?
Through the chair, definitely. That's part of our window as far as allowing it. A lot of these things you'll look, so we'll have 5 centimeters and we'll clear it and we'll have another 5 centimeters. We typically have to go back and redeploy to the higher traffic ones and potentially leave the secondary or the local less traveled roads. We basically start our schedule right back over if we get multiple snowfalls within a couple days. So even though we may be day 3 of clearing this, if we get a major snowfall, we got to go back to day 1 on clearing our roads, right? So that does add up into it. We put 120 hours in there. We deploy truck plows, like the 1-ton trucks, the same day we do with the other things, and they head right to the hamlets, right? So we put 120 hours in there, but it is typically being initiated within 1 day, the hamlets. It's just the clearing of them, we look at them as the same thing. Lower traveled roads within the hamlets get a lower priority, so.
Deputy Reeve King.
So I guess I have some questions, and maybe at some point I want to have a more private conversation about some of them, but potholes and road problems, so where culverts have, the edge of the road is eroded away on a corner where we have culverts through at an intersection, potholes on some of our spec crude dust management, just potholes in general and general road condition. My understanding is that our road supervisors and the grader operators are to be reporting those issues and getting them repaired. I would say at this point in time, I'm not completely happy with the system that's there and with the accountabilities that's within that system. And we often are having either ratepayers or other individuals identifying those problems long before the people who are supposedly driving those roads on a regular basis are identifying them. I can think of 2 or 3 situations in the county right now that have been there for an extended period of time and haven't been addressed. And so I am concerned that in this policy, we are shifting a lot of responsibility to both the road supervisors and the grader operators. Are we placing accountability within the policy? So, you know, if a pothole exists there for extended period of time, or the edge of a road is broken off at an intersection and it becomes a hazard for truck traffic and those kind of things. If the responsibility sits on either the grader operator or the road supervisor, is there accountability for that as well, built within the policy?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So, yes, I think maybe it would be prudent if council does have concerns, and hearing from the rest of the council, if we perhaps defer maybe some of the discussion on this to a future committee of the whole. Just looking at the identification here I have with the route patrol system, with the current inspection system we have right now, perhaps at that committee of the whole I can identify a little bit deeper discussion as far as what we actually do, our processes for identifying, repairing, and closing off these requests, just to make sure the council is comfortable. Because it does refer back and tie back to this policy and the changes that happen on it. So if that's something that council is comfortable with, we can definitely do that.
Well, certainly I think that there is room for some conversation around that. Like I don't want to be really negative about our road situation, because I think we actually have a very good road system and it's been maintained quite well. I do have some small concerns that I would like to see addressed in some way, shape, or form. And so if that's an appropriate forum to do that, then I would say, sure, I'm amenable to that. But I think that there are some, we have a great road system. We don't want to see that erode away. And so there are some things that I would like to see addressed, maybe more than what we are today. So yeah, if that's the suggestion, I'm agreeable to that. So, but it's up to the rest of council as well.
Councillor Cunningham.
So just to clarify, I do have a few more questions, but are we wanting to save those then until we come back to a committee of the whole, or are we wanting to address them now? Because I'm 100% with Deputy Reeve King. I have had so many comments, and I think we've all heard them, people coming from other municipalities saying, you know, the minute you hit Kneehill County, the roads are amazing. So I think my goal is how do we maintain that standard? And I don't want to take away services that are going to reduce that. So just wanting clarification, do we bring those questions then back to Cal, or are we wanting to address them today, or how are we going about that? For Mr. Hogan, maybe?
I don't think we can answer that question until we have a motion, so I will make the motion that we have this discussion in a committee of whole meeting. As I think we'll leave administration to set the date, is that?
I don't know if we need to set the date, but I
Yeah.
think to defer this item
Yeah.
until after a discussion with committee of the whole, or how would you like to see that phrased, Mr. Hogan?
I think we would recommend that council defer this item. We'll put the actual name of the item in the motion, but the council defer the item to a future committee of the whole meeting for further discussion.
Okay. Deputy Reeve King?
I guess like I said, I'm agreeable to that. I think that we had one conversation around this policy, I believe at a committee of the whole previous. And some of the things that came back in the revised policy, I don't know if they reflected that conversation that we had, or the end result was what I, as a counselor, thought I might see in the policy as it came forward. So, yeah, I think that a broader conversation would be good. I have a bunch of other questions sitting on the tip of my tongue too. And one of the things that maybe I would like you to consider before we get to that committee of the whole meeting would be some discussion around what we do with roadside weed management. I really have a major concern in that area and what it's doing to the shoulder structure of our road and what it's also doing for our agriculture industry. And I just think we need to have a large conversation around that as well. Our roadside weed management and vegetation management program as it relates to how we grade and manage our road structure.
Okay, so getting back to the motion, is that how you would like to see the motion read, Councillor McGee?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, is there any discussion to that motion? Mr. Hogan, I thought I saw your fingers up in the air, but maybe I was misled.
They were, through Mr. Reeve. I can address it after the motion as well.
All right. So the motion reads that council defer the grader and gravel services policy 13-2 discussion to a future committee of the whole meeting. Yes, Councillor Cunningham?
I'm just wondering, Councillor McGee, are you happy with future, or would you want some kind of an idea of a time frame on that?
I'm good with the administration setting the time frame, but that's, you know, up to you guys. I'm willing to amend it too if that's not suitable.
Is there any further discussion to the motion? I'm not seeing any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And carried unanimously. Mr. Hogan?
Through Mr. Reeves, so I think in response to a couple of questions from council, in advance of that or over the next short time frame here, if there are questions or concerns that council has around this topic or things that they would want to see discussed at that, please send them to me. If you just email those to me, then I can take them and we can take a look at them and see what we'd need to prepare for that committee of the whole meeting. So if there are things there that we need to put a bit more time into, then of course we might push that to meeting. But if they're all things that, okay, we have those, we're ready to go, then we'll bring it forward.
Just one last comment, and I want to make it very clear. I am not unhappy with the overall condition of our roads and with the work that our staff is doing. I think there are just some smaller issues that need to be addressed within this policy that would help us to maintain that super great infrastructure that we have. And so that's the reason why I think some of the questions that are lingering in the back of my head, I'd like to see them addressed. And I certainly want our grader operators, our road crews, the guys who are doing the maintenance that are out there to know that in general, I am very happy with our roads and the condition that they're in. There are just some small things that I think we need to address within the policy to ensure that that stays that way.
And I would, the mic is on. And I would concur with Deputy Reeve King's thoughts. I think our roads are in actually very good shape. But there's the odd little hiccup every once in a while, and if we can take a look at that and kind of develop that into the policy someplace along the line. But for the most part, I would much rather have our roads, they're in fantastic shape. Okay, thanks, Mr. Zier.
Thank you.
Okay, our next agenda item would be 5.1.1, Bylaw 1889. Welcome, Ms. Hazelton.
Good morning, Mr. Reeve, members of council. So we're bringing back to you Bylaw 1889, which is a land use bylaw amendment. During a closed session portion of the June 13th, 2023 council meeting, council directed administration to initiate an amendment to the land use bylaw 1808 to revise the sections relating to wind and solar renewable energy. Council further scheduled a committee of the whole for July 18th to discuss what they would like to see included in these proposed sections. A draft bylaw was presented to council at the July 25th council meeting. Additional amendments were made based on the direction of council at this meeting. Administration also incorporated some of the requirements that in our existing land use bylaw specific to the private renewable energy projects to ensure that they can be permitted appropriately. Administration also included a few additional clauses specific to commercial industrial renewable projects. All of these changes have been noted in red in the red letter version attached to your package, and then the timeline noted on the table below has been revised to reflect further direction from council. Council has noted several concerns they have with renewable energy projects and the amount of high classification farmland that is being taken out of production for these projects in many municipalities. Council is also aware of the sections of the Municipal Government Act that empowers the province with greater authority in approving these projects. Council has chosen to make changes to the land use bylaw in order to protect these high classification lands and also to ensure that the land use bylaw provides greater clarity to developers regarding the expectations of Kneehill County for these projects. We have provided a revised bylaw as per the direction received at the July 25th meeting. We have attached a clean version of Bylaw 1889 where all the changes have been captured but have been accepted so you don't notice the amendments. We have also attached the red letter version so council can see the additional amendments made to these sections based on the July 25th direction and the additional clauses submitted by administration. Administration is open to additional discussion or questions regarding this draft amendment. It should be noted that having less than a month notification time for our urban and rural municipalities to respond is shorter than we would typically do and may be problematic. So holding the public hearing at the November 14th council meeting would provide a more typical response time. Again, and we have also attached, Eric has worked on the maps so that you guys can have a visual of what that looks like for the setbacks that you were talking about. So we have those attached as well. Again, there hasn't been any financial implications. We've been able to do this in-house, but it has pushed off some of the intermunicipal development plan reviews that we were proposing. So we've got it here, and I'm open for questions, comments.
Council have any questions for Ms. Hazelton? Councillor McGee.
I just wanted to reiterate that we know that this caused an adjustment to how you rolled out the MDP review, but I really appreciate that we put the time into this because I think it needs to be the priority. So I just want to say thank you.
Deputy Reeve King.
I just have a couple of little things that I'm wondering about. When we named our water bodies that we were going to protect, and created a buffer around. Was there a reason why we didn't consider Brackeneer Dam in that list of water bodies? It is a campsite that is ours, and it is a recreational water body, so I wondered if that's possible, we might add that to our,
We can, I guess it never came up, so.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
just was thinking that that might be a worthy.
Yeah, I know, and the Swabble got added later by Debbie because we hadn't, or Counselor Penner. Yeah, so we can add that one too.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I just had a question on, in 3.3, which is specific to land. And we talk about stormwater drainage collection and management for a 1 in 30. My recollection of the conversation that we had talked about a 1 in 50, and I don't know if that's excessive in our request or whether that's reasonable. So that's under site suitability analysis, including but not limited to, so 3.3 specific to land.
Okay. The 1 in 30 is what's typical. I know that's what other agencies use, but you can pick whatever you want. It's just they have to do a broader data search when they're looking for that.
It's just my recollection is that's what we had talked about was 1 in 50. If 1 in 30 is, I mean, I can live with that. I would prefer the 1 in 50, but that's also
Okay.
council discretion as far as whether we want to go that direction or not. And then the only other thing I had was a question related to, and it's a concern that we've seen on the existing site, and that's would be under, let me find the right section, 3.5, post-construction, and item B, where it talks about a vegetation, weed, and pest management plan.
Yes.
That addresses how invasive plants, weeds, and pests such as Richardson's ground squirrels will be controlled for the construction period and the projected lifespan of the development. It says it's to be submitted for review and approval by the Kneehill County Ag Fieldman. I'm just wondering about, again, accountability within that. So is there some way that we can word something in there that provides a requirement that if we feel that the situation, the vegetation management is inadequate, that we can leverage that after they've established whatever cover they feel is adequate? So if, just for example, I know of several situations this year where people have seeded permanent forage cover crops, and because of the dryness, their grass alfalfa mixtures, the grass isn't establishing, the alfalfa is, they're really a weedy mess, and they likely will be for the next 2-3 years. So is there a way that we can put into this policy, especially for solar, where they're covering a big piece of ground, where we can request vegetation management if we feel it's necessary? And right now, the legislation allows us to deal with the sort of the noxious and other weeds that are on the list, but it doesn't necessarily deal with just an unsightly and weedy property. And so these have that possibility or potential to be that way. And so I am concerned that we don't have any wording that would allow us to request vegetation management within a solar site, just from a point of view of community standard. So that's just a question. I don't know how we would go about doing that or what the wording would look like, but it is a concern to me. And I know it is a concern to our ratepayers as well. And we've seen that reflected based on the comments we've received on the existing site.
Okay, I'm going to think about that if you don't mind. Our challenge is, it is something that we would need to bring forward to AUC, because part of that weed management is something that is part of their application to them. So if we want to see it look different, then we would have to make sure we participate on that end, because once it's been considered, we're stuck with that plan. And so maybe that wasn't the best choice of words, but
Just a follow-up comment.
Yeah.
I guess that is my concern,
Yeah.
is that once that's been considered, we're pretty well locked into it.
yeah,
So if our bylaw reflects an expectation that there'll be a vegetation management program, not just proposed,
Yeah,
but
ongoing.
implemented, and there's some follow-through over the period of the project's life.
Okay.
That's my concern.
Mr. Gannon, you had a comment?
Yes, through the chair. I think one direction that we can look at is that through land use bylaw, we can create different levels of standards of expectations for the land management, but I think we need more of a precise understanding, and we'll have to do some investigation of what that type of foliage that we're looking for and the expectations of coverage and a reasonability of design that we're looking at that we can enforce. So we'd have to do some work in the background to see what that would look like to ensure that we're keeping every area to that same standard or that same requirement. As we know with foliage, it can change, and the reasonability of where our expectation and how they manage that is where we have to somewhat be understanding to a level of success that they're able to do it on those properties as well. So there may be some more investigation we'll have to do on how that can be managed and how that expectation of growth in that area, if they're going to manage that way, to what expectation to the property versus the extended property, and regularity of managing it as well. So we can look at that in the background, but I think it's going to take a little bit more of to dwell into to make sure that the language is appropriate and that we're covering it the way council wishes.
I guess I just felt that if we don't ask the question now, we establish this bylaw and the changes to it without having addressed that question. I mean, if you come back and say to me it's impossible for us to do this, that if they come up with a plan that says we're going to seed permanent forage and it's going to be grazed by sheep and the AUC is going to say that's okay, it's not okay, but if that's how our limitation's going to be, I really would rather see us have addressed it beforehand and have made it known that we have a concern about that, rather than miss it in the discussion with AUC and the proponents of whatever projects come along. And that's the only reason I'm raising it right now, so.
Councillor Christie, I apologize, but I did want to make sure that the answer to Deputy King's question came to fruition before I recognized you. So go ahead.
I'm concerned about noxious weeds and ordinary weeds, but I'm also concerned about the vegetation when it dries down in the fall for fire control. So they talk about sheep grazing and stuff, and I'm watching a couple other sites where there's been sheep in it. There's still a huge amount of organic matter there that if they got a stubble fire coming through for our fire management, it's a problem. So somehow we have to have some teeth in there to say, you say you're gonna do this, get it done, because if there's tonnage of forage in there that's on fire, nobody's gonna be able to go in and look after it.
Councillor McGee?
I'd like to support what Deputy Reeve, what's your name again?
Ken? Whoever that guy is.
Councillor Christie have said, I think it is better for us to have this more clear. I don't trust that how the AUC looks at this is with any more substance than what Mr. Gannon was talking about than what we will. I think we need to offer the substance and say why we have this expectation, because frankly, it's ours, and we should get to have that. And so I'm strongly in agreement that we need to modify this piece.
Councillor Forbes?
So I guess this also brings up does our unsightly bylaw have to include renewables as well? Because we hold our ratepayers to a certain standard, even though they're complaint-based. Why wouldn't this also be in the same thing? So do we need to look at our unsightly bylaw as well?
I believe our unsightly, and that falls under protective services and bylaw, that side. I believe it's only for hamlets. So it doesn't apply.
Does it have to be for only hamlets is my question, I guess?
Well, And that's a council decision.
Deputy Reeve King.
Of course, the problem happens to be when we take it out of our hamlets and we put it into a rural setting, the question becomes what's unsightly and what's not, and who defines that term unsightly. So I might be a friend of ancient equipment, much like Councillor Christie's father was, and I might have a large collection of old steel sitting in my yard that somebody driving by, and it's, you know, full of weeds and grass and stuff that grows up around it. And somebody might drive by and say, boy, that's pretty unsightly. But in my eye, it might be a beautiful thing. So, and we have other properties within the county that are, in my opinion, unsightly, but to the people who live there, that stuff is valuable to them. So how do we define that? And it gets really difficult in a rural environment. You know, abandoned buildings, old machinery that gets parked in tree lines and different spots, and for whatever reason it stays there and there's attachment to it. So it's different. It is different in the rural than it is within a hamlet or an incorporated municipality. So,
Councillor Cunningham.
So you stole my question, Deputy Reeve King, of course, but no, thank you. I know, it's perfect. I just want to clarify, when you mentioned that when the AUC deals with the weeds portion, or if they did, let's just say in the current one, so how does that change what goes in our development agreement? Because I think in the current one, weeds are addressed in that. So do we have to follow exactly what the AUC has come forth with?
So, and I'm just going to go because we only have one.
Right.
So in that case, they submitted a weed management plan with their application to the AUC, and that was approved by the AUC, so we're binding them to that plan. So if we want something different and our expectations are different than what that plan is, we need to be able to define what that looks like and what that expectation is. And is that, and I think Mr. Gannon was going there a little bit, is it a standard that we would look at everybody across the board? Or are we just, because this is where our problem comes on the planning side, if we're going to put a standard on an agricultural parcel, and now all of a sudden we have some other agricultural parcels that don't meet that standard, are we now chasing those? So we want to make sure we're really clear on how we define the standard we're expecting, and then is that standard going to be everybody's standard in the ag?
Deputy Reeve King.
my understanding from conversation with our assessors is it's no longer agricultural. Once it's under solar, I thought they said it is assessed and defined differently than agricultural. So in my mind, we should be able to apply a specific standard to a parcel that's no longer considered agricultural that has a solar power development on it.
Mr. Hogan.
Through that part of the discussion where we go into and what Mr. Gannon and what Ms. Hazelton have been putting out there as a nuance to this is whether it's the standard is going to apply to something if you place it on here, and that's what we're trying to work through. So even though it's not assessed as an ag parcel, it's still a development, and the question then remains, are you going to go after every development for the same thing? Or if the argument comes forward that there is, it's of concern because there's an agricultural producer or a seed plant nearby, then the question becomes, then shouldn't the rest of their neighbors, regardless of if they're a development or a farm or whatever else, be subject to the same standards if that's out there? And that's a much larger question, because that's a change to enforcement philosophy, resources, things like that. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but there's a lot to it. So as we go through this, one of the things that I might suggest is, I think administratively, we've heard the concerns around the vegetation clearly and loudly. If we, as we go through here, what we're recommending today is first reading and setting the public hearing. So we're not passing the full bylaw today. If we proceed with that, it does give administration some time to go back and take a look at some of the issues that came up today and recommend where addressing them might best fit. If that's a change to this bylaw, if that's part of the development agreement, or we can have some discussion internally on that, and then provide a recommendation to council along with second reading, which might be an amendment to what you see in front of you, or it might be a suggestion that we handle it a different way. Because we will have to work through some of the nuances as well around the AUC approval. As Ms. Hazelton was saying, under the legislation or the current approval framework, we can't address something that AUC has already addressed. Now, the testing of what exactly that means is, maybe there's some gray and some wiggle room in there. We can take something they've done and we can't undo it. In some cases, we can maybe add a bit to it, as long as it's reasonable. So there are some things like that, but again, those are things we can explore internally to see what the best avenue to address that concern might be.
Deputy Reeve King.
And certainly, I'd be the last one to not be appreciative of the amount of work that's gone into this, and so I want to recognize that. It's just, I felt it was perhaps something, and I know I said I had 3 small questions, and I guess maybe one turned into a bigger question than I thought it would be.
A can of worms.
But certainly, I am very appreciative of the amount of work that's gone in here, and I acknowledge that we have probably distracted you from some other things that are important also. And so, just so you know, it's appreciated and your efforts are acknowledged here, and I am grateful for what you've done. But I would appreciate seeing, and so, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
So yeah, I'm very appreciated too. Just, I always have to remember that it is definitely ratepayer driven and industry driven and kind of the current hot topic of the province. So that's why I feel it's a priority here today and every day right now. I just want to comment, I don't think it's something we'd want to change in the bylaw, but I know with number 9, the public consultation, because what I'm hearing a lot of times when we talk about the weeds, I think I mentioned this last time, these companies are required, and it says that they'll hold 1 open house. I don't know if it's been a county's direction to have somebody from Kneehill County attend, but I would really like to see that. And like I said, I don't know if that needs to be in a bylaw. But the hard part that comes for me as a counselor, and one that does field a lot of questions and calls and conversations about this, these folks are holding open houses and they are making these guarantees and promises to adjacent. So I think that's something, a piece that we're missing, is we maybe at times aren't hearing those conversations that these companies are having with our people. And so I'm not sure how we solve that, but it's just, I am hearing from a lot of people that when they are coming to your house, they're visiting you, these open houses, there definitely is promises made, and I guess, how do we make sure that we can follow through with those?
Deputy Reeve King.
The only comment I would make in terms of the private conversations that they're having with people when they're approaching them about these developments is really the onus is on them to ensure that within the contract that they have with the company, that the promises are in writing. So if a company comes along and says, we will do this, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm gonna see that in the future, then really the onus should be on me to make sure that it's in my contract with them. And if it's not, then maybe I should be reconsidering whether I'm signing the contract or not. And that's part of individual responsibility somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councillor Cunningham.
So just to clarify, I'm not meaning the people that are entering into agreements, I'm meaning the people that are adjacent landowners that have gone to these meetings, or, you know, they've had the individual conversation. These people want to come most times. I know in the current one that's on the books, like people have actually, there's been 3 or 4 representatives from companies that are coming to their houses. And so that's just the hard part for us, is I think that we have to I'm hearing from my ratepayers of what the promises were made in regards to weeds. And that's, I think we've come into a little bit of issue with that, where we talked about that last meeting. Were we talking just about the, the certain species, or is it weeds in general? Because they're being told different things and what's coming forward, so.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Councillor McGee.
I think we've had huge amounts of discussion around this, and we'll always want it to be tweaked with a little bit more power, I think. So in recognition of time management around this, because I really think the sooner we have this in place, the better it will serve us in advocating for our needs as a county when it comes to these type of developments. I would like to make the motion that is recommended, being that council give first reading to bylaw 1889 as presented for the amendments to replace sections 71 and 74 of land use bylaw 1808. I also thank administration for the commitment they have made for taking a look at how we can look at some of these other questions and what best mechanism there is. I look forward to hearing those responses as well, because obviously this topic has many layers of concerns, and some of them I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to accept we just can't address.
Okay, thank you. We've got a motion before us that council give first reading to bylaw 1889. Is there any discussion to that motion? And I believe that what we're gonna do is we're gonna include the Brackeneer Dam and the,
Correct. We'll make the changes.
The
The 1 and
3.3.
50.
yeah,
And then we'll try to come up with some verbiage on the vegetation before second reading.
the can of worms one,
So if you could,
3.5B.
so if you could add to my motion with the recommendations, with the changes recommended.
Amended.
Is that good vocabulary there, Mr. Hogan?
With the sections discussed. And there could be more of them by the time we get to second reading, so. Public hearing, yeah, determine some of that.
You could take out for the amendments.
Yeah.
And just say presented to replace.
Yeah.
I like that better. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hogan, any comments on the motion?
No, I believe that that's sufficient.
Okay, so Councillor McGee, that is the way you'd like to see that motion presented?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so we have a motion that reads Councillor and Council give first reading to bylaw 1889 as presented to replace section 71 and 74 of the land use bylaw 1808 as amended. Is there any discussion to the motion? I see none. Call the question. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Somebody want to set a public hearing date?
Can I just ask a question first?
Yes, Deputy Reeve King.
So we are suggesting October the 24th. Is that problematic enough that you'd want to change it to later?
Our only concern was the notification going out. Typically, we provide that to our urbans and rurals longer than a month. And we've put it at later because that's the org meeting as well that day, so it's 11. If we push it off a one council meeting, then we could have it at 10. So it's really up to you. We'll pull through whatever you're recommending, but it is more ideal to have a little longer notification.
Oh, Mr. Gannon?
Thank you, through the chair. With the additional research that we're going to have to do in the background to create a standard and work on a potential amendment as requested by council. More time will always be better. So some of the problems we have is that we're bringing an amendment to the second reading. If council doesn't like the amendment, it really puts a pinch on being able to move forward with the remaining portion of it. So giving us more time to be able to bring that forward potentially to council would provide us with a lot more opportunity to do our research.
Deputy Reeve King?
So then, am I understanding you to say that potentially that we might see what that amendment might look like if we delay to the 14th of November? Might we see it prior to that meeting so we could?
Through the chair, that's my hope, is that we can get it to you sooner to ensure that we're aligned rather than come and set a public meeting to an item that may not be acceptable to council.
Thank you for that.
Deputy Reeve King?
Well, then if council's agreeable to it, I'll make the motion that council set the public hearing for bylaw 1889 to be held on November 14th, 2023 at 10 a.m.
Okay. So we have a motion to set the public hearing for bylaw 1889 on the 14th of November at 10 a.m. Is there any discussion to that? All those in favor? Carried unanimously.
Thank you, Bud.
Thank you, Ms. Hazelton. You coming back later?
She's like, no, I'm out of here.
Alrighty, our next agenda item will be Protective Services, 5.3, the RCMP Quarterly Report. Welcome, Ms. Grosfield, and anytime you're ready.
Good morning, Council. Thank you very much. Today, I'm presenting the RCMP Quarterly Report, and this is for April to June is their quarterly report. So their stats are there. Kneehill County has 5 RCMP detachments. We only collect reports from 4 of them, just because Innisfil is a tiny portion to the north. Community priorities set for the RCMP include rural crime prevention, community safety through programs including mental health, presence in rural communities, road safety, and partnering with CPOs to do some joint force operations, which they are doing. So the stats for all those RCMP detachments are attached. And then I've also included Kneehill County enforcement stats, and this is from May 16th to August 15th. So within Kneehill County and the hamlets. The stats are there, 34 citations under the Traffic Safety Act, 24 were warnings, 10 were tickets. And there was 1 court appearance that we needed to go to for somebody speeding 155 in a 100 zone. So that was a good catch. We actually just had another one this last week going 146 in a 100 zone. So 12 animal control files, 11 general bylaw files, 3 unsightly files, 2 assist to fire departments for traffic control and RCMP. 10 school program visits, including, or school/community, including library, seniors outreach, Acme color run, fire safety talks in some of the schools, track and field events, and bike rodeos. Rural patrols, so 505 patrols totaling 321 hours, and targeted patrols, and so these are kind of complaint-driven speed areas for certain speed areas. And so we did 11 patrols totaling 7 hours in some different locations throughout the county. And then 2 speed signs were put into operation mid-August. And so just working with the transportation department a little bit and putting up some posts for the signs to be mounted to instead of on the trailer, because the trailer, we found that as soon as you took it on gravel, it was very bouncy, and I don't think that helped the sign longevity of that old sign. So those 2 signs have been put out into operation, and we're starting to collect the data from them, and it's good. It just allows us to increase the patrols in those areas or not, or maybe even times that allows us to see the times where the most speeders are. So that's great. And then within the contracted municipalities, these are the ones that we charge for. So any of the hours or files listed here, we actually charge those municipalities for those hours. So there were 2 citations under the TCA, 25 animal control files, 22 general bylaw files, and then 24 unsightly files. And then again, just contracted patrols within those municipalities. And financial and staffing implications. So just our 3rd peace officer received his appointment finally. So we do have right now 2 back on the road full-time. So that is good. And a lot of these stats are, just so you know, limited to kind of 1.5 peace officers during this time. So a lot of work was done by that 1 peace officer. So council's options are to approve the recommendation as presented, amend the recommendation as presented, or bring back further information.
Okay, does council have any questions for Ms. Grosfield? Councillor Forbes.
So the unsightly files that you have, are they of the same property or are they of different properties within our hamlets?
Each file is different.
Okay, and I guess a question I had would be is how many are in a file before we do something as a county about it? Do you know, like offhand, like?
Sorry, how many are in a file?
No, like how many complaints would be in one file before the county would take action against the unsightly property of that? So my house looks like a junkyard in the town of Torrington. It does not, but if it did, and you got complaints and the file was open the first time, how many of those complaints do you get before action is actually taken against if it was my property?
So we do, through the chair, we do action as soon as we do get a complaint. Okay. We will go out and we'll take pictures, and then we'll do, we might have to work with planning on some of those files. And so kind of just depending in between the 2 departments who owns what on that file. But yeah, like I think that the enforcement side of it happens right away. It just depends what all needs to be enforced on that property and what we have coverage for under the bylaws. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It sure does.
Okay.
And the reason why I was asking is so that people will understand how we go about it, because I do have a couple of people in my little hamlet that have issues with unsightly properties.
Yes, it definitely does take some time, and there are other factors that might contribute to not enforcing.
Mr. Hogan.
Yeah, just to build on what Ms. Grosfeld has said, if you're seeing it on here as a file, that means it's something that we've actioned.
Mm-hmm.
I have people that ask me, and because they are complaint driven, what happens when a complaint's given? So I just wanted an explanation as to what happens to them for anyone who's listening.
Councillor Cunningham.
So maybe not so much about the report itself, but just a question that's come to me from a rural business owner. And maybe yourself or Mr. Gannon would be able to help with this, but previously, about a year ago, one of our peace officers had mentioned that there was going to be an implementation of a rural crime watch program. And I'm just wondering if that's still something that we're looking into or where that's currently sitting.
So through the peace officer, we do extend the times of the patrols. So we do targeted patrols. So rural crime prevention is more, for us, our role in that is presence more than anything. We don't go into the evenings. But we also do the CEPTED program as well, and so that's crime prevention through environmental design. And we have a peace officer that can go out and do those inspections on people's properties if they contact us. As the rural crime prevention program is actually through the RCMP. And so it's whenever they actually ask, that specific program is when they actually ask us to do some joint force operations with them, we will do that with them.
Councillor Cunningham?
Okay, I'll clarify that with them, but I know they actually had a visit from a peace officer and that it was brought forward that maybe there would be a collective group that was going to be formed. So I'll maybe touch base with them and get a little bit more information and bring that back to Mr. Hogan. So.
Councillor Penner?
So currently, I think it's died down a bit, down in the southwest, crime is up, and there's been some charges made. Do our office, I know they work alongside with the RCMP and whatnot else, but they don't, or do they ever, if asked, work during the night? I've had that question to me about them assisting the RCMP and helping out during the night, because that's when they're catching a lot of this theft.
So right now we don't, like our latest time is 8 o'clock on some of those evenings. The issue that we have is it's a liability issue for us. If we do have RCMP out there at the same time. However, we are also not under, we can't do anything with criminal code. So the only thing that we would be doing is reporting those to the RCMP, which is what we do right now. So if we see a suspicious vehicle, we'll do the same as the public and report it to RCMP.
Mr. Hogan, you have a comment?
Yeah, again, to build on that, that's a standard in most peace officer programs because we don't have criminal code authority, even to do things that are, our officers are not trained to the same level to deal with some of those types of events or circumstances. As well, our officers are not armed. So if you're an RCMP officer, you have a sidearm with you, our officers do not. So we don't, in actuality, as has been said, our officers in some ways are not that different than the public when it comes to some of those incidents. So even if we have a thing as an example, if a bank got robbed in Three Hills and our relationship with the RCMP is intended to be safe as an example, say a bank in town got robbed and the suspect vehicle was seen heading down Highway 21 or even a range road. If our officers observed it, we would pass that on to the RCMP, but we would not engage in pulling over that vehicle. So there are safety considerations for the officers, and that's where, again, why a lot of the times we don't patrol overnight, because that is more criminal, that's not within our jurisdiction. As was said, we do some other programs which facilitate looking at rural crime, and those are some of the ones just even being visible in the communities, which is the patrol routes that were outlined in the report, showing that logo during the day, having those relationships, as well as the CEPTED programs that have been mentioned.
And I do want to add a little bit to that, if I could, through the chair. So we actually just got access to the RCMP channels as well through AFRAX radios. And so we're actually, just so that we actually have that direct connection, because right now, if the peace officer is out there and the RCMP is out there, we don't have connection through radios. So it is a huge liability and safety issue for our peace officers to be out there, so because they're calling them by phone. They can't call them by radio. And so that's a change through the Alberta Public Safety, ministry, to change that and to allow us to have that direct access with the RCMP. So a little bit step up from the public reporting those crimes and working together with them on crimes. But that's kind of where it's definitely a safety issue and a liability issue for the municipality.
Deputy Reeve King.
So if there's no other discussion or comment related to that report, I would make the motion that we accept the RCMP quarterly report and the Kneehill County Enforcement Report as presented, And I'm just going to add the comment, as always, the work of both our CPOs and the RCMP is very much appreciated, and the relationship that we have with the RCMP detachments is much appreciated. So thank you for bringing the information, and just pass along our thanks to those people out there working on our behalf.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to receive the report as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And I will call a recess as we have a delegation before us at 10, so give us a little bit of time, and we'll be back for the 10 o'clock delegation.
Thank you.
Everybody back?
I mean, we're all spread out here, so.
Alrighty, I will bring the meeting back to order. It is 10:02, we're a little bit late coming back in, but I would like to welcome Mr. Jim Northcott. If you'd like to move up to the presenters table, we will introduce ourselves as council. I just wanted to let you know that you've got to push the button for your mic to come on. You know how that's done. All right, so starting from my far right.
Lorelei Michelle Cunningham, so I'm Division 5, so northwest, southeast of Three Hills area.
Carrie Phopes, Division 4, so Torrington, Sunny Slope, and right before her division.
Wade Christie, I'm Division 6, so I'm in the northwest corner of the county.
Morning, Mr. Northcott. I think I know, or I think you know where I'm from.
Hi, Ken King. I represent Division 7, which is the northeast part of Kneehill County.
Good morning, Jim. I represent Division 1, which is over around the Drumheller, Horseshoe Canyon kind of area, so our far southeast. Glad to have you here.
Morning, Jim. Debbie Penna. You know where I live, where I represent, so.
Morning, Jim. Mike Hogan, Chief Administrative Officer.
And joining,
Sorry, my name is Kinza Barney. I'm Corporate Services Director.
I'm Kevin Gannon, I'm Director of Community Services.
okay, introductions are done. Turn on your mic and do your thing. Is it on? Doesn't look like it should be.